Bill, why don't you kick this off and talk about what you're going to be teaching us tonight?
So one of the very first things that we need to go over is creating a variable inside of Onshape. So I'm going to maximize these because it's easier to navigate back and forth on a Mac anyway. So let's go into the company properties. So most people, I have a professional account and I can have a company. I can have multiple people in my company and I can set my company up in a particular fashion. One of the things that I'm using is something called the properties. One of the things that I would recommend is that if you go into description, I want it to read DESC. So you can make that modification to the existing properties. And if you go through all of this stuff, I didn't want quantity, I wanted QTY. So you can go in and you can rename all of those stuff. Something else that I ended up doing is I don't use half of them. If it has a little key right here, that means Onshape created it. And I don't need 3 titles. So right now I'm showing the ones that are inactive. You can come over here and you can inactivate it and it just kind of puts it over to the side. So when I'm actually trying to do a filter search on all of this stuff, since I've inactivated the title 2, it won't show up, okay? The other thing that you can do with a pro account is you can come over here and you can actually create your own property. And in this particular case, I created a property called lib, and it's a Boolean. So Booleans are true or false. And it's active because I'm going to use it. The default value is don't make this part, don't put it in the library, and then a brief description. A lot of these properties, you can edit them in a version, and you can also edit it in a workspace. So a version's immutable, but you can also change some of these properties. And this is where you decide, hey, you know what, let me allow, I misspelled a word. So you can go ahead and you can update that without creating a new version of it. That's pretty much all you have to do to set up a library inside of Onshape. So we imported the derived components. We derived this. I actually designed this off center, so I had to center it up, and we went through and we actually built this whole thing up inside of a part studio. And what we're going to do is we're going to start again today and with a part studio and create it in, or we're going to move it into an assembly. So let's get moving. So I started my assembly and I decided, well, maybe I should put an image in my assembly. So these are 2 different versions. And it's this particular version that I'm going to start. Assembly 9. So what did I do? What I ended up doing is going back through history, and this is where the beginning of my assembly is going to happen. And what it did is it dumped me into that part studio that I was just showing you. And I've got derived components. I got various ways to build this. Let's go back up to the part studio, and there's nothing in it. So let's go and grab the part studio, and got to make sure that you get your composite parts, and we'll insert it. Let's go take a look at the bill of materials. And this is one of the problems with having a part studio, is because it doesn't know that there's 2 shafts. It doesn't know that there's 2 bearings. Part numbers, descriptions, the name of the file. I tend to put in the material and the appearance. You can see that mine says QTY. That's because I went into the properties and I modified it and I updated it. You do have color control in the assembly. All you have to do is just put this is more than just a bill of materials. This is literally everything that you want to do with your parts you can do inside of the assembly if you just put it inside of the bill of materials. Okay. One of the things that I'm finding out is that this naming, I also use title, I use description. The part number is a part number. You can't do what you did in SolidWorks when you come over to Onshape. There's just so much more that's available to you, and you need to rethink your whole schema. Feature names, they're for me, they're not necessarily a part number. Okay, so I want to be able to name anything I want to, therefore name is mine. I can call it whatever I want to. This will never show up in an out-facing document, okay? Description may or may not, part number will, it'll go out. And then the title I'm reserving, because we don't use title anywhere else. Title is something that I'm going to use for the actual drawing itself, because a drawing title is the name. A lot of people use description. I'm choosing not to do that. So let's go through and clean this up, because this is wrong. So let's go back to the Part Studio. And let's start cleaning some of this stuff up. So this, and this, I don't want them. The reason why, because these are McMaster car parts, and I'm not going to drive them in here. The other thing that I want to get rid of is the cylinder. So what's interesting, part, and folder, hit the delete key. And they're gone. So, but I got some errors. So let's start fixing these errors. I go back over here to the assembly. And so one of the habits that you have to get into when you bring stuff into an assembly is you always have to fix it. My good friend Philip told me. And then you should group it all together. Okay, nothing will move now because of that. I'm going to take the cylinder because it doesn't exist anymore. Those are the two bearing blocks. This does exist. The crucible doesn't exist anymore. So it's gone. Let's go grab a crucible. And we'll put it inside the part. So now I'm in the assembly. This is a manufactured part that I downloaded off the internet. So I'm going to assemble it here. And I'm going to go over these mate connectors in just a little bit. I'm going to align this up to the origin. And then I'm going to offset it. I'm going to go back to my assembly. I'm going to come over to here, and I'm going to say this Boolean subtraction. It's missing because I deleted it. Put it back. One of the things that happened is that this actually came out of the assembly, and it's going to create an in-context reference. And now my fixtures come back. And all I had to do is to replace the reference. This is actually showing that I have grabbed this geometry. This is your in-context reference. So I'm actually referring to the assembly. And I do have a habit, because you really have to maintain these. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I'm going to rename it. And this is Crucible. One of the things that I end up doing is I'll have multiple contexts. Okay, right now there's none, and then there's the crucible that created the actual crucible itself. Let's go back to the assembly. And I need another shaft, so I'm going to hit Control C, Control V. I have another. It's cut and paste, right? And I'm going to assemble that. This is where, let's go over this. So right now, this is a mate, and the mate is going to generate mate connectors. So there's one mate connector, and here's a second mate connector. So now there's a mate connector and another mate connector. And it's kind of important to have a distinction between those three things because there's a transformation that occurs between them. A lot of people, what they won't do is they won't come in here and they won't edit this mate connector location here. So this mate connector is attached to that shaft because when I highlight that mate connector, the shaft highlights. This mate connector is attached to the plate because it highlights. I want to offset this shaft. And to do that, I think it's important to offset the mate connector with the shaft. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to move the shaft 1 millimeter up. I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to highlight these so you can actually see what's going on. There's two mate connectors stacked on top of one another, and they are fastened together with 0 translations and 0 rotations. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to edit this. And now I'm going to put a translation between the mate connectors. So for every mate, there's 2 mate connectors. There are 3 transformations. The transformations go that there's, let me take a cross section through this. So you can actually see this in action. 1 millimeter between the shaft and the mate connector. 2 millimeters between the mate connectors, and then there is no offset between this mate connector and the bottom plate. Okay, so let's say that you're going along and you're trying to assemble something and there's no feature, there's no geometry where you want it. We'll put it close and then offset that particular mate connector offsets. And with that, nobody does this right here, and nobody manipulates these mate connectors. And I think that makes mating very difficult to do because you're always constantly looking for a mate connector in a spot where there isn't one. And I'm finding that I can usually get it, offset it too, and then I can go ahead and design my part. You're not going to be able to assemble by just using this particular dialog, okay? You're going to have to go in, you're going to have to manipulate offsets, rotations associated with the mate connector. And once you start getting that feeling down, then it just goes a lot smoother and it's a lot easier to deal with. If you hit the K key, it turns off the mate connectors, hit the J key, and the mates actually go away. Hit Shift X and the cross section goes away. So while we're having fun and we're playing around, let's deal with this guy right here. Since that's offset, why isn't this one offset? Well, somebody grouped them. Okay, so I need this to update and move up 1 millimeter. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to suppress this group. I'm going to grab it and I'm going to translate it up 1 millimeter. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to unsuppress him. What's illegal about that? Okay, so you don't have to have a mate connector with everything. And right now it's going to be a split between grouping stuff and adding features. One of the problems with old parametric modelers, and maybe you'll agree with me, is that the assemblies, you just can't figure them out. And it's very difficult to understand, especially if somebody else did it. You end up deleting it and reassembling it so that you can figure out how it's done. So one of the things that I'm working with is I'm really trying to make the assembly a usable assembly, something that you can actually work with. And I do name them so that I know what they are. If you do forget what they are, you can just right mouse click on it and you can just say show me. And I use this a lot. And it actually highlights what's constraining that particular part. Let's go and grab a McMaster-Carr part. We'll put that in here. We'll come over to here and we'll say, I want to make this. So I'm going to use a fast. I use fasten almost all the time. You grab it. We'll come over to here and we'll grab the hole. Now you got to learn that holding the shift key down locks it. And let's put one over here on the other side. So there's a lot of ways to do this. I like Control C or Command C and Command B or Control C. Right mouse button does not rotate a part. So just use the triad. This triad is very powerful. So you can reposition the triad and you can rotate it. You got to get good at using this triad. We'll do this one the same way. We'll grab this geometry and we'll position it on this plate. Let's go take a look at this. Now I'm double clicking the bottom plate that allows it to go into the actual assembly itself. And because I've created one context, most of the time I run without any context, and this would automatically update. But in this case, all I have to do is update the context. And notice how it's ghosting my parts inside of this assembly. Okay. Oh, one of the things that I would recommend is that let's take this assembly and let's name it, and we'll call this mate, because this is where everything's being positioned. So if I move this up, oh, I can't move it up, so it's not going to move because there's no motion in this yet. Let's go back. And it positions it inside this part. Let's go fix these shafts. Oh, you know what? Let's go make a change. So I modified the plate, and I created this in the first meeting, and lo and behold, nothing works. So let's go and make this work. So down here in the shaft definitions, I've got a sketch that's declaring I have a bunch of failed parts because I literally deleted the part that it was referencing. So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. And I don't want these points anymore. And I'm going to take this part and I'm going to associate it with that hole. And I'm going to make it concentric. And this is an offset, which is broken. It doesn't know where that is anymore because all of this was in context with the other design. It wasn't. It was actually because it was all done inside of the part studio and I deleted the reference to it. Okay, let's go ahead. We'll put a dimension in this. And because this is a clearance hole, we'll just go a little bit bigger. We'll say okay to that. And lo and behold, it regenerates and puts the hole in the right spot. Okay, puts the hole in the right spot because of the first part that I put inside of there. Let's go to the Crucible. And let's go update it. And the bearing moved because the hole moved. And I just asked it to go update that. I'm going to go back into the sketch. I'm going to take this hole and I'm going to make the assignment. So I pick on this. The constraint is cyan. Cyan means it's outside the sketch. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's an in-context reference. Let's go over that. If you put your mouse over the in context, it'll highlight the actual reference that it's there. Inside the sketch, the cyan just means that the reference is outside the sketch. So I'm going to delete that reference, which actually deletes the context. And then I'm going to dimension between here and here. I'll put that dimension in, and I'm not going to change that number. I still don't have black, so I'm going to come over here. I'm going to say that this, I have to clock that. So I'm just going to say that it's horizontal. Now I have a black circle. I need 4 of them, so let's come over here. We'll do a circular pattern. I'll grab this, take the origin, drag it onto that origin, change this to 4. And I have 4 dots. I say OK. Voila. Okay, so I went from a bearing inside of a part studio, and the actual holes were controlled in that part studio. I deleted the parent and the children blew up, and that's why I had red dots at the beginning of this. That bearing is now inside of the assembly. I created an in-context reference so that I could locate the hole, but I do not want to have an in-context reference showing where this bearing mount will never change. I do not want to drive this with an in-context reference. Designing an in-context, it's all about choosing when to and when not to. Most people have too much in-context. The worst thing to do is to open up an assembly and everything's tied to everything else. And that's not responsible in-context designing. So you want to choose your battles and not overdo it. We'll go back to the assembly and everything updates over here. Let's make this thing move. Okay, so if I go try and move this, why won't it move? So I just right mouse click and I say, well, show me the mates associated with that. And grouping pops up and everything's tied into this group. So let's go over here. And I'm going to take this part out. I'm going to take that part out. And I'm going to call this top. And for every top, there's got to be a bottom. So let's call this bottom. And let's create a top. It's nice when your nomenclature makes sense. And I like to have my groups up on top. And top should probably be on top of bottom. And now you understand the differences between grouping and mated, and it's a mixture of the two. Hit the J key, and that actually fixes it. If I go back to my in context and update it, right? So let's go back to the assembly. And let me go to my named view. Actually, I use named views a lot. I put it in my hyperlink. Puts it back into the position. Now you know why I use a named view, because it'll always go back to, I don't care where it's moved to, I can always put it back, okay? One of the things that's with Onshape that's been expanded on is the idea that I can have multiple named positions and I can have multiple context. If this is an automated piece of equipment and this is station 1, I can have in context associated with that. I can move it. I can have in context associated with that. I can move it again. That's 3 positions, 3 different in context, and this is basically how you do it. Let's go over one other feature that's associated with, I'm going to hide all parts. I have an in context. It's saying in this assembly, I have all of this stuff associated with in context. While I'm in here, this should be a shaft. I don't really name stuff in the part studio anymore. I'm doing most of it inside of the bill of materials. And then, oh, here, let's do this. So plate, this top plate. I like having this one up on top. So we'll do these a little backwards, but also notice what's happening over here. So the crucible goes on the bottom and it reorients just like it. Anyway. So now I have motion. I am going to set this one as the primary instance. I'm going to come over here to the part studio. And where did the bottom fixture go? I'm going to go back to the assembly. I'm going to change the primary instance to crucible. I'm going to go back to my part. I don't use primary instance because all it does is it just says, oh, don't show that one in the assembly. I just want it all to ghost. It's kind of hard to understand what primary instance is doing. That's why I'm showing it to you, because all it does is when you do go over into the assembly, it ghosts it. Okay. In fact, this is the one that I want to ghost. So if I'm going to ghost one, that would be the other shaft is what I want to ghost. So I'll set this as a primary instance. Now when I go back, show all, and look at that. Something else that I want to do, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping here. Inside of this shaft, I'm going to insert, I never cleaned it up, so this is a mistake. And I'm going to delete that face. And that's inside of this folder. The other thing is that these are global definitions for all of these fillets, and I made a mistake on that. Since it's global, it should be outside of this folder. So I like keeping my folders nice and neat and cleaning that up. Let's go look at our library part. Oh boy. So I'm going to put the cylinder in here now. And I don't have any position for it. Let's go take a look at the cylinder. First off, I don't have a cylinder to insert inside of here. I have this, but the best this will do is it'll actually extend and retract, but it is not a working part, okay? And I want to make my library parts functioning. So I need to create an assembly. Most of the stuff that I work with are assemblies. And I will take this part and I'll rename it. I do a better job renaming these components in real life, but just to get things done. Let's go off, let's insert this, make sure you turn that on, and let's go grab that. Okay, this is, oh, that's funny. This is a composite part, and you can't explode a composite part. I mean, if you want to explode it, all you do is you go back to the part and you say, don't do that anymore. So I'm going to suppress this. It's no longer a composite part. I come back over to here and it says that can't find that part. So let's delete that. Let's go reinsert it this time. So there's my part, and it is two separate parts. I don't like this. This is my isometric. That's not the way a cylinder should look. So I'm going to grab this triad. I'm going to look to the end of it. And I'm going to drag the ball, and I'm going to reestablish where that triad is. I'm going to zoom in so I can do it correctly. I'll hold the shift key down, and I got it. Right mouse click on that, move to origin. Okay. Now go to the isometric view and rotate it 90 degrees. You have to get good at that because so much geometry comes in and it's not in the right orientation, it's not in the correct location. This is one of the first things I always do. Right mouse click this, fix it. Let's go look at the straight view. Okay, so this is good. Let's go ahead, we'll mate this. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make the limit assignment. And I always drag it and I look at the value. So this is a positive number. That means that as it goes down, look, the only restriction there is in limit is that this number has to be bigger than that number. So this is 0. And this is 2 inches of stroke. Now if I come over here and if I look at this, it moves. But in actuality, these threads should be bottoming out up against this thing. So what I want to do is I want to add this 4 millimeters. And now I have a part that moves. I don't like the yellow stroke, the pin. So I'm going to come over to here. You get to reformat this every time you start a new drawing. That is being changed. It's coming. And you'll be able to have multiple bill of materials. That's coming also. I need to figure out which one is what. So I didn't have to go back to the part. I could actually do it inside of the assembly by using the bill of materials. I come over to here. It now functions properly. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to the properties and I'm going to assign the part number. Should put in a description, and down here I'm going to make it a library part. I'm not going to save this because I already have it in my library. I could have 2 of them. I don't want that, but that's really all you need to do to create a library component is just say, hey, I'm a library component. With that being said, I can now delete this. I can delete this. I can delete this. And I can delete this. I go back. And let's go ahead and let's insert a library part. library parts have to be in other documents. Turn on your filter, give me library parts. Here's the library parts with everything that's working. And it all works. Okay. There's no place to put the end of the shaft. So one of the things that I'm going to do, right mouse click on this, and I'm going to open up this linked document. While that's opening up, I need to go in and I need to edit this bottom plate. So I'm going to double click them. I'm going to hide these sketches. And I'm going to position a mounting hole, but I don't know what the mounting hole is. So just so you know what I'm doing, I'm just bouncing between these tabs. And inside of every library part, I like to take a snapshot of what McMaster-Carr has so that I understand that this thread diameter is 3/8 24. And while I'm here, this is a number 5. Hopefully your machine shop has that. So now that I know what my thread sizes are, let's go off. I'm a real stickler at putting features where they belong, and I'm just going to roll back to here. And I'm going to put in a tapped hole, and we'll go 3/8 24. And I don't have a sketch point, so I'm going to use a mate connector. I'll put it on here. And once again, I don't like the location of that mate connector, so I'm just going to double click that, single click it, and then I'm going to move it into my part. Now I'm going to go down and I'm going to put the 5 up above. So I'm going to come down here. And I've got a hole because I cheated. I'm going to come back up to here. And I just offset this face to create the top plate. And I use this surface. So I've got to get rid of the hole, right? Because all I did was I offset that face. So let's go plug that up. Come down. Let's go put in another. This time we want it number 5, 40. And where do I want to put this one? Right on top of that one. Through all. So it's going all the way up through that part. Now that I've got my holes in here, roll to the end. And go back to the assembly. And now let's assemble this. Hold the shift key down, grab the center. Come here, grab the hole, invert it. I'm going to take the top of the cylinder. And you can hit this stuff without zooming in. Solve. And I'm going to offset this. And the reason why is because I can't see the threads. Get enough thread so I can put a jam nut on it. Okay, we got a small problem, and that is my shafts aren't long enough. So how are we going to deal with those shafts? You can double click on the shaft and get it, or I typically just get back to the part studio by clicking on the same fixed parts. Of course, that should have been in the up position and not the down position. So this is how you go back to the assembly. Oh, it is. This is how you go back to the part studio. I typically work it without in context, so I expect for it to automatically be updated. That's how tall we need to make it. How is this defined? Let's go into the shaft, grab that feature, grab that dot, take a look at it. If you can't see it, go to the right view. You look at it, and I don't want 109. I want 180 millimeter shaft. Go back to the assembly. Let's take a look at this thing. Because if this is a press, it would be nice if there's compression. And sure enough, there is compression. So I wanted to make sure that when I bottom out this cylinder, I'm actually going to get compression. And I can always go back to the original position. Yeah. I can always go back here. And go back to the bottom plate. Update the context. This is pretty much the state that I'm constantly working in. It's here, it's back, and I'm bouncing back and forth between the assembly and the part studio all day long. Let's go look at our bill of materials. They're all in pretty good shape. Let's generate the missing part numbers. The descriptions, we need to figure out how to deal with that. The materials, I didn't go around to that, but I would assign my material properties here, and I'll get rid of that column. And right here, add my titles, and I'm pretty close to being able to generate a drawing. And next time, we'll generate a drawing. Let me go through and recap real fast. I never did go full screen on that. We did the library of parts. I wasn't able to actually get to the screws. This is something that we can do on the next users group. Are there any questions?
I don't think there were any questions, but you did a great job kind of presenting your material. There was one person said they liked the fact that you added the screenshot to the McMaster car. That way you had that reference data there.
And as a library standard, let's do stuff like that. And anybody else have any good ideas, let me know, because you're going to build a library up once, right? And I really like the idea of not having to move stuff to a folder called library. That just seems to be more trouble. I don't know how this is going to work out, but I think it's a good start. It's 7 o'clock. I got to get out of here. Have more people come. Sorry about shutting down the group. Kevin and I will hopefully work it out so that we can meet in person. Anything else, Kevin?
That's it. Thanks everyone for coming and watching Bill do his thing.
Good night.
Bye, bro.